Now welcome to another Versus video, where once again this will not be some sort of contrived deathmatch scenario where we pit Master Chief from Halo against Din Djarin from The Mandalorian. Sorry to disappoint if that's what you were looking for when you clicked on this. Though yes, there will certainly be some comparisons made between these two rather similar characters. Instead, this will be more a discussion about how the two shows that these characters currently find themselves in are not only handling these characters, but also how they handle all the lore that goes along with creating a show or content within a well-established and beloved intellectual property, or IP, or franchise if you prefer, like Halo or Star Wars. One that has a large, vested, and very passionate fan base, which also means do be warned there will be some spoilers in this video for the currently running first season of Halo. But before we can even get to all that, maybe we should quickly define what exactly is lore and ask why is it so important, not just to the fans, but why it should be to the owners of the IP. And yes, there's the more generic or dictionary definition of the word, that lore is essentially a collection of knowledge and or traditions around a particular subject, and it's typically something that's passed on from person to person. And sure, that definition also does, for the most part, work for what lore is when it comes to Star Wars or Halo or any IP. But in their cases, it is a bit different. It's more the collection of all the movies, shows, books, games, and everything else that we consider stories or content set in the universe that makes up the lore. To put it as simply as possible, lore is what the fans of a franchise are actually fans of. It's the collection of content, the stuff that came before that not only made them become fans in the first place, but makes them eager for more and willing to pay for more. Thus, you could almost argue it's not the lore itself or all the content that actually gives an IP value or isn't exactly how its worth should be measured. Instead, it's the number of fans or people willing to pay to consume it and, of course, the sheer name recognition, which is where the real value of an IP lies. The number of, shall we say, customers the franchise already has, coupled with the potential to lure in more. And what keeps current fans or customers happy and tends to lure in more is, of course, quality content, new quality stuff to watch or read or play. But for fans, it's also how the new content honors and fits in with the lore, how it respects the stories that came before, the ones you first enjoyed and are the reasons why you are a fan and continue to watch and pay. Which would almost make you think that the most important things to the companies who own these IPs would be to treat the lore with extreme care and or caution, that they might be hesitant or even unwilling to tamper with it too much out of fear of losing their fan base or their customer base, which means devaluing the IP unless they create more fans than they lose with the new content. Which, sure, is possible, but one could ask why do that at all? Why change it at all when there was something special about the property in the first place that led to the formation of the initial fan base, which of course gave the IP value? Meaning, if you more or less stay true to the lore and stick with what works, you keep your current fans happy, and if lucky, you continue to capture lightning in a bottle. You continue to replicate what created fans in the first place, and you continue to make more fans on top of the ones you already have. Heck, you might even think these companies would look at the lore as, and forgive me if this is an extreme analogy, but look at it as something like a bomb. It's something that clearly has the potential to create quite the impact if used right, but you really only want someone with a complete understanding of the inner workings messing around with it so that it doesn't blow up in your face. Lore, in theory, is not the type of thing you'd want any old person adjusting or messing around with, thinking that they can tinker with things and do it better, snipping random wires here and there or splicing others together, trying to create something new and different that'll have a greater impact than how it originally was. Which brings us right back to Master Chief versus Din Djarin, or the way the Halo series is treating their lore or using it compared to the Mandalorian and how they're going about things. And I know some might want to immediately say this isn't a fair comparison because one of them, The Mandalorian, has 2 full seasons under its belt, not to mention Din Djarin kind of hijacked a couple episodes of the Book of Boba Fett, while the other, Halo, at the time of recording this, only has 3 episodes. But that's actually one of the reasons I find it interesting to compare them, because you see in those first 3 episodes of Halo, there's been far more plot lines created, more characters used, and some very well-known and established characters in the lore, and more of the, in general, lore dug into than The Mandalorian even got close to including in its whole first season. So far, Halo has gone all in on using as much lore as possibly can be crammed into each and every episode, and it's been using that lore and these characters, or maybe I should say abusing, more on that in a bit, but it's been using all these characters and lore to create this large, complex web of intrigue that, of course, involves plenty of rather morally gray characters, all with their own secret motives and agendas to sort of puzzle out. It's basically like a giant mystery box, you could say, where we don't really understand exactly what's going on with anything or any of the characters. It's trying to quickly or kind of artificially create intrigue around every single corner with every single character in the hopes you'll eventually come to care about the characters involved in the intrigue because of the initial intrigue. And it's doing this instead of getting you to first care about or maybe dislike the characters and having their then understood interactions with each other be the main source of creating intrigue and why you continue to watch. Simply because you want to see what the characters do next and where they take the story. And I tend to call this style of writing or creating a show, or the failed or rushed version of it, Game of Thrones syndrome, but let's save that discussion for another time. On the other hand here, The Mandalorian throughout its whole first season focused pretty much entirely on just one character, or two if you count Baby Yoda, though he doesn't receive much actual characterization. And it also had only one real overarching or rather simple story, which was Mando trying to figure out what he was going to do with this child, as well as, of course, having smaller stories within most of the individual episodes that brought in some new characters, and that also usually got resolved at the end of the episode. Though, sure, The Mandalorian certainly had some intrigue right out of the gate. Almost all shows are going to try to do something to immediately surprise and hook you, especially nowadays with the sheer number of shows out there to compete against. And in this case, it was the introduction of Baby Yoda, later to be known as Grogu, at the end of that first episode, which left fans with numerous questions about not only him, but the species in general, as well as eventually what the bad guys might want with him. And a big part of the reason why it immediately creates questions is because, yes, it delves into the lore, or a mystery in the lore, I should say, the one surrounding what's up with Yoda's species. And so we could call this a bit of a cheap tactic to use a Baby Yoda to hook people, and perhaps to some degree it is. But that said, a series shouldn't be unwilling to use its lore, it just has to know how to use it in the right way. It has to know how to walk that fine line between pointless fan service and something that actually serves the story in a meaningful way. Don't just use things for the sake of using them to hopefully get a rise or reaction out of your fans, and certainly don't use them in a way that is disrespectful to them. And in this case, the use of a Baby Yoda as well as using Mandalorian culture in the series as a sort of backbone isn't or doesn't come off as a heavy reliance on lore, mainly because learning more about the Yoda species wasn't the point of the first season, nor was learning more about Mandalorian culture. It's really only used in a way to learn more about the character of Din Djarin and what the culture means to him or how it impacts his life. The first season of The Mandalorian is rather small in scope and scale, especially compared to what Halo is doing in just 3 episodes. It's opting to be more of a personal, character-driven story that keeps you watching, not because it's a web of massive intrigue or an addition to the lore that changes everything. You don't watch it because you need to know the answer to some mystery they've been dangling in your face for weeks now. You watch Din and Grogu because you like the characters and you want to go on an adventure with them, wherever it may be headed. It's the classic saying that the journey is the reward, not the destination. The show banked on you, maybe initially watching because of the Star Wars name, but then staying and continuing to watch because you actually grow to care about this rather vague and somewhat detached character of Din Djarin, through his compassion for Grogu and the change it brings about in him over time. And it takes 2 full seasons for the story to truly come to fruition or pay off, when Mando finally reveals his face to Grogu and he and we can finally see all the emotion there. We feel the pain that comes along with having to say goodbye because we've gone on this journey with them. We understand everything about this. And the creators and writers were so confident in the power of that relationship on or over us, the audience, that not even Luke Skywalker himself showing up could truly take away from the impact of that moment. While in Halo, Master Chief's story is rushed and not even the focal point. The helmet's coming off early and often, and he's literally talking about or telling us all about his feelings that he's suddenly experiencing as he searches for his past. All the while, Mando or Din Djarin never once actually talked about his feelings or his past really, though we do get glimpses and flashbacks that are self-explanatory instead of leading to more mysteries or questions about the character, like Halo is doing with Chief somehow having visions of Forerunner artifacts. And don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying mystery and intrigue are bad things, not at all. But when they're overly used or used in a way where one mystery leads to another, which then leads to another, when your story isn't character driven at all, your whole series becomes waiting for answers that likely aren't going to be as worthwhile as, say, getting quality character payoffs would be. But perhaps the biggest sort of irony when comparing these two is that the Halo series took a character that was famous for never removing his helmet other than in some books and getting a glimpse of his eyes in one game, and then immediately removed it and showed us his face, and keeps showing us his face, thinking this would make for a better story. While The Mandalorian purposely created a character that wouldn't take off his helmet other than a few exceptions over the first 2 seasons, and then waited for the right moment to finally fully take it off in front of everyone, because they thought this would make for a better, more impactful story. And building to that big reveal to Din showing his face to Grogu was always what the story was leading to over those 2 seasons. There were certainly other storylines generated, particularly in the 2nd season of The Mandalorian, but it never lost its way. It was always about us coming to this moment between our 2 main characters where they had to say goodbye to each other, and we were left wondering what it meant next for both of them, not how is this clue going to fit into some sort of bigger puzzle. And so, whereas The Mandalorian intentionally used the lore sparingly and adds little pieces to what was already there, the Halo series goes the other route and intentionally uses or twists the lore to create an entirely different version of Halo, and seemingly all for the sake of creating a mystery box, intrigue-driven Game of Thrones style show, instead of just trying to create something that actually honors what Halo actually is and its fans. Basically, what I'm saying here is that the first season of The Mandalorian is the story of a bounty hunter and child that feels like it just so happens to be set in Star Wars, one that, yes, absolutely uses some lore, but mainly adds to it in its own small ways. It or its creators don't think it can do a better version of Star Wars than what has come before, but instead they try to enhance what's already loved about it. And no surprise, it ends up being one of the most universally enjoyed pieces of Star Wars content here in the Disney era. It's also done what you'd think Disney would be most concerned with. It makes the lore better and increases the number of fans. It increases the value of their IP. While on the other hand, Halo uses the lore to create something else entirely, something intentionally different. And not only do the creators admit to not looking at the games, but they take the work others have done, the hard part, the creation of the characters and the world building, and reshape it to tell a different story altogether. They thought they could do Halo better than those who had done it before them, those who had created it. And no surprise, the show so far has not been overly appreciated by a good chunk of the fan base, and likely isn't doing much to add value to the Halo franchise. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about all this. Are you surprised by the way these companies tend to treat their lore, how they treat their IPs, that they don't do more to try and preserve what's special about them to lure in more fans and keep the ones they already have? Whatever you think, you know what to do. Leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars and some Halo. And until next time, thanks for watching.